Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure once again to bring this webinar to you from the Raymond A. Mason School of Business. As those of you who have been with us before know, my name is Eliza Parrish. I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement for the Business School. And as always, we bring these webinars to you as fulfillment of our promise to provide you with opportunities for lifelong learning. It is my pleasure today to introduce you to Andrea Tecce. Andrea is an alumnus of the school, which makes it all the more fun for me. She is a member of the Lead Start team, a company dedicated to providing leadership development opportunities to those in leading corporations, nonprofits, colleges, and university. Andrea joined the Lead Start team in 2017 following a distinguished career at Navigant Consulting, where she was most recently the COO for their global legal technology solutions practice, which focused on complex data challenges, information security, and cyber advanced analytics and eDiscovery. Andrea has proven success and leadership in financial management, strategic and business operations, resource management, as well as coaching and developing large teams. Her passion for leadership development started in 2008 when she led the launch of the DC and New York chapters for the Women's Leadership and Mentoring Alliance, which ultimately introduced her to Lead Star and inspired her to join the team. Andrea is CPA and CFF, and she received, as I mentioned before, her undergraduate degree in accounting from the College of William and Mary. And with that, Andrea, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Eliza, for the introduction. And welcome, everyone. As you said, I am a William and Mary alum as well, and actually a proud parent of a 2019 grad from the Mason School of Business. And I assure you, I had no influence on that particular him joining William & Mary or the business school, or maybe I did. But I'm excited to be with you all here today. And as Eliza said, I spent the first 25 years of my career at a consulting company and really maneuvered my way through consulting into finance and operations. But it was there where I found my passion for leadership development and really started to focus on, what could I do to develop myself and to develop others, and was introduced to the Lead Star team. So I am really excited to kind of walk you through today some things that I've learned along the way and I continue to learn. We're going to be talking a little bit about mindset, about some of the behaviors that you really can employ to help influence others. Now, I'm going to do my best to keep you engaged, so I encourage you to stay engaged, and we're going to leverage the technology available to us. You have the chat function there in the middle. To the extent that you have questions along the way, I encourage you. I'm going to reach out to you in chat to help share some comments. The more we can learn from one another, I think that will help engage us as well. So let's get started. The first thing I'd like to have you all think about is influential leaders. And you see up on the screen a few different ones, but think about who some influential leaders are in your life and what are some of those qualities that those individuals possess. And I'd love for you to share in the chat, what are some of the qualities you think about when you think of those leaders? And if as you're pondering and sharing ideas, if you're wondering who that good-looking couple is in the top right, those are actually my parents. And maybe as you guys are thinking about those leaders, it may not be someone famous. It may be someone in your family. It may be a past coach. It may be a teacher that you had at, William and Mary. So what are some of the things that you guys would like to share? I'm seeing charismatic. You guys can read it too, but motivational, compelling, inspiring, trusting, motivation, challenging. We're seeing that a lot of these behaviors that people are sharing happen to deal with the people skills. And as you guys are sharing there, I'm going to let it continue because I think it's really important to appreciate that it really is about the people skills and not necessarily about the technical or the IQ. And that's the part that people kind of fall short on. We start out in our careers and we're so focused on getting the job right and doing a good job that we often miss sight on the people skills. So that's what we're really going to be focusing and talking about today, are those people skills that you can really help and develop. So I'd like to take a quick poll of you all because I would like to engage and try to see, and I appreciate, look at all the great stuff that's coming up in terms of our sharing of qualities. And think about where do you rate yourself right now? Strong influence, work in progress, needs work, or I really have no idea. And let's give this a moment for people to kind of chime in, and then we'll kind of close it out. I love that we can see real time how everyone is responding. And, you know, it seems like the work in progress is in the race, which I have to say, knowing a lot of William & Mary grads, that's the humbleness of our William & Mary alumni kind of showing through pretty strong, in my humble opinion. Okay, well, let's close that out. And I think you get the point that, you know, this is really something that we kind of can work with, but gives me a sense in terms of the audience we have here on the phone. So as we get started, I think it's important to realize that we manage things, but we lead people. And the real difference in understanding that, as we manage things, that's managing processes, data, equipment. But in order to lead people, we really need to influence outcomes and inspire others. So if you take a look at this photo, anyone in this photo could be a leader. The person out front could be the one who's leading the pack, and then the one in the back could be holding up the rear, where ultimately anyone in the middle is helping make the communication back and forth. So it's important to note that true leaders are not defined by their power, notoriety, prestige, or job title. So often in my old role at Navigant, I would have someone say to me, if I could just get that director title or that managing director title, then I could win more business out in the industry, or my team would respect me more. And this is where I think there's a big misconception. It's not about that corner office or the title you hold. It really is about the behaviors you lead in terms of how you're really going to inspire and lead others. So I'd like to bring up another poll for you. Do you think, let's get a sense from the audience, are leaders born or are they made? So if you could pull up the second poll, I'd like to get a sense from the group. What do you guys think? We have a little bit of born. We got coming in. So it's looking as all these are coming in, about a third of the folks think that leaders are made, and probably 2/3 that are both for the most part. And I'll share with you that it's actually both. And we look, and we can, you can close that out for me, Eliza, and let's move, if we move on, we'll see it really is both. And there was actually a study done by the University of Minnesota on twins, and they looked at twins from a long period of time and kind of studying that nature versus nurture. And what they found is that 30% of influential characteristics that influence others has to do with intelligence, extroversion, good looks, and charisma. I remember seeing in someone mentioned charisma in our chat function earlier. And the other 70% has to do with those spark qualities that you can develop. And it's important to differentiate that. And I will say, given that I think this audience is primarily William & Mary alum, that you probably hit the jackpot on the 30% genetics in terms of intelligence, because it's obviously a tough school to get into. So, you can thank your parents for that piece, but don't be alarmed if you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm not an extrovert, so I won't be a leader. There's actually some great research on the fact that introversion, the quiet, that introverted leaders are also very strong and very prevalent in this day and age. So what I'd like to focus our time today as we move forward, I'm going to talk a little bit about mindset, but then I'd like to really talk about those spark qualities. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about mindset. I'd like to cover some discussion around self-awareness, because this is so important, understanding the perception is reality. And then we'll talk about some of the behaviors that you can employ and how you basically can get in shape to be an influential leader yourself. So as we think about mindset, leadership development, it really is a head game. And it's so important to understand that, because you have control over it. So the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of executive function. And the first part of executive function to think about is this cognitive flexibility. And this is really our ability to see different solutions to problems, to think outside the box. We are all great problem solvers. So if our car breaks down, we think, oh, I'll call AAA. If I spill something on my clothing, I need to bring it to the dry cleaner. But when it comes to people, we often get into that same rut of operating in the same response. If any of you have seen the Groundhog's Day, you're familiar with Bill Murray is in this day and he just can't get out of it. He keeps having to try different behaviors and try different solutions to get out of this particular day. The same holds true when we deal with people. I learned a great trick that actually works really well with my husband in just substituting language. If you basically disagree with someone, you can say yes, and, as opposed to yes, but. So my husband loves to go buy some nice big things, and I will always say yes, but we can't afford it. But I started switching the language, and the response is remarkably different. I say yes, and that's a great idea. Let's figure out how we can afford it. So same goes true in the workplace. Often if you disagree with someone, think about your language and how you approach the situation, and it really can create a different response. Another great example of that is caller ID. You might see an example of someone coming across on your phone, and your first instinct is to really shrug and be like, oh, I don't want to talk to that person. But if you think differently about how you might respond to that individual, the chances of you getting a different response in return are very high. The other part of the executive function I want to talk about is this cognitive discipline. And this is, I think, probably one of the most important ones. And you're going to see this theme throughout the entire presentation today. And this is the idea to really inhibit that instinctual response and substitute it with a learned behavior. So a great example of this is when we were in grade school, we were all taught to stop, drop, and roll. And why did they teach that to us? Because if a fire comes out, your first reaction will likely be freaking out, which isn't going to help the situation. So we want to substitute that learned response of the stop, drop, and roll. And the same holds true with leadership. So as we talk about the spark behaviors throughout today, the idea is to think about, pause for a moment, wind that clock, think differently, and think about how you might substitute the overreaction with a positive reaction so you can get a better response. So, the great quote I think about for this is, think before you act, especially before you overact. This is really going to help build your credibility as a leader. So I'd like to give you a little test, and I appreciate that you are all sitting behind your own desk, or you might be with some other people. So this is really up to you to make this work so you can really feel what I mean when I'm talking about this cognitive discipline. I'm going to throw some words up on the page, and what I'd like you to do is read the color of the word out loud from top to bottom. So I'm going to ask you to give it a shot, shout from wherever you are, go. So my guess is it was a little harder than you all thought. Our first instinct is to read the word, to say yellow, blue, orange, black, red, green. I can read it really quick because that's my instinct. I've been taught to read. But when I asked you to read the color, so green, red, blue, yellow, blue, black, you're hearing I have to pause and I have to hesitate. And this is this idea of this cognitive discipline of really having to substitute that learned response. So we are going to need to slow down with our interactions with others and really think. So I think this is a fun test to help you kind of experience that. So hopefully you guys took advantage of that experience, even though I have no idea if you did. So the next part of mindset that I'd like to just cover really quickly is this idea of this fixed mindset versus growth mindset. I've been talking to some friends lately who have 5- and 6-year-olds, and I know that they're teaching this growth mindset in school. And as children, kids are sponges, right? So they are constantly absorbing and developing. Whereas we get older, sometimes people think, well, I've reached, I've learned everything I'm going to learn. So this idea of fixed mindset is one that intelligence is static. I'm smart. I've learned what I can. It is what it is. There's no more to learn. Where the growth mindset is really the mindset that it's a journey and it's a long life of learning. So when we think about the fixed mindset, if you have this mindset, ultimately, when it comes to challenges, you're quick to avoid them. You're not open to this negative feedback. You give up easily. And ultimately, you see your effort as fruitless because either I'm smart or I'm not. And you're really threatened by others' success. And ultimately, it leads to people plateauing in their career and in their lives. Where the growth mindset, if you have this mindset, you really embrace challenge. You learn from other people's feedback. you let, you fail forward. You don't let things challenge you, and you don't let them set you back. And more importantly, you kind of look as, trying and learning from others, and you're really excited about other people's success and the effort for the path to mastery. But more importantly, as a result, you reach these higher level of potential. And I think this is so important that we really keep a growth mindset. So I have in here, and who knows how this works for you, but I thought we were close enough to Halloween so I could pull this off. But I really think of life and a career as a jungle gym. And if any of you have read Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg, I mean, one of the points that I really pulled out of that book was this idea of the jungle gym. And I think my career at Navigant in particular was a great example of that. I quickly moved up, into the consulting ranks as a managing director. But, I reached that peak and I was looking for other experiences. And it wasn't until one of my colleagues actually said to me, Andrea, what are you doing to develop yourself? And it wasn't at that moment that I felt like I was the top of my game. I had reached the title. I had big clients. I had a decent book of business, but I wasn't doing anything to help myself grow. And that's really when I started getting exposed to women's leadership and leadership development in particular. It became very passionate about how I could develop myself. And I took on different roles within the company, some that were very lateral. And if learning the finance and operations, they weren't necessarily step ups, they were step overs. And I think this jungle gym with the skeletons actually helped present, because some of those roles I did not care for, but I did learn from them, and they helped add to my tool chest. So I think it's important as you move forward in your life and career to really be understanding that each move doesn't have to be a move up, but it could be a move over, and think about what you could gain from those experiences, even if they're not the best experiences. So comfort is death. Be proud but never satisfied, and there's always room for improvement. So as you go through those peaks and valleys, it's okay to enjoy those valleys. Everybody needs a break, but with that growth mindset, I encourage you to be thinking about where you can go next. I often found myself in those valleys and trying to figure out how am I going to get myself out of them. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is this concept of self-awareness. To me, this is such an important point, is having to do with your communications and understanding how you work with others. There's a tool called the Johari Window, and really what I would like to appreciate from this is that this is different quadrants of understanding what you know about yourself and what you know about others. And the first quadrant has to deal with this open area, and this is the area that you want to be as open as possible. This is information you know about yourself and others know about you. So as you can imagine, when I was at Navigant for 25 years, this was a pretty open area because I'd been there a very long time. So now that I start with LeadStar, it's an area that I really need to focus on because people don't know me as well. So as you meet new people, as you add others to your team, it's really important to understand that, because as that window increases, that's really how you increase the effectiveness of your teams and you as a leader. The second area is this hidden area, and this is information you know about yourself, but others don't. So I encourage you to share and invite others to understand and meet who you are. And you're probably going to have to invite first because nobody wants to go first. But as you do that, others will open up to you. And the third area is this unknown area. This is information you don't know about yourself, nor do others. But the more that you open that large open area and you share and discover, this is an opportunity to kind of tap into your hidden talents. Maybe, I could be the best keynote speaker in the world, but I have no idea because I've never tapped into that talent. But by working with my colleagues and sharing and understanding, you can tap into your, hidden talents. And the last, and I think the most important area, is this blind area. And this is one of just appreciating, this is things other people know about you, but you don't know. And the last thing you want is people talking about you and not understanding you, because ultimately perception is reality. So you want to get on the same page with folks. So as I mentioned, the goal is to make this open area as large as possible. The way you're going to do that is by, self-disclosure, sharing, but more importantly, be open to feedback. So how are you going to make that blind spot more open is by welcoming people to give you that constructive feedback so you can get to the shared discovery. So I'd like to turn for a moment, because I think, while I think this is such an important area of feedback, I'm curious to know from you all, what holds you back from sharing feedback with others that you might work with, or family members, or anything like that? Love some feedback in the chat. Hurting their feelings, finding the appropriate time. Thank you, Kristen.
I thought Steve's cultural norms was an interesting one as well.
That is a great one. Yeah, so that sometimes goes to this generational differences and technology. Like, how do you communicate with certain people? Because different people communicate different ways. There's so often that people have this open door policy, but do you really have an open door? So I encourage you, kind of thinking about, these are really great points that people are sharing on the chat. So hopefully you guys are kind of looking over some of these as well, because often it's up to us to take that step and know that by sharing, we're ultimately going to be better individuals on a team by all being on the same page. I always would say with my team, to know Andrea is to love Andrea. What you see is what you get. But that's, it's better that everyone knows you. And I encourage you to encourage others to share that information. On this point, my family is a great support system for me. I have a lot of nonverbal feedback I give to people. I am not a poker player. I am a poker player. I don't have a poker face. And a lot of times I'm giving off cues I don't intend to. So encouraging others to give you that feedback so that you can be better and know how you're being perceived is really, really important. So I'd like to jump in next to kind of talk about some of the spark behaviors that we all can start to develop in ourselves. Now that we've got the right mindset, what are some of the behaviors? And the first one I want to talk about is this idea of credible performance, because developing credible performance, it's all about trust. And there's really three components of credible performance I want to focus on today. The first has to do with this meet and exceed standards, narrow your say-do gap. And what do I mean by that? If ultimately you have a deliverable that you say you're going to get to someone on Monday, make sure you get it to them on Monday. I'm sure you all have some colleagues that you just notoriously know that they are always late. Well, when they are always late, it ultimately impacts their credibility. So you have to think about how your actions are impacting your credibility in the workplace. My father is an immigrant from Hungary, and he really believed everything was on a handshake. So his word was his bond. So we had lots of tenants in the Florida Keys that he managed, and when he passed away, all of them, their leases were ultimately a handshake, which was great because they trusted him. But ultimately, for me, it was a little more difficult. But the point is, and hopefully you take it as such, is that your word should mean something, and your actions should mean something. So be mindful of that, because actions speak, louder than words. The next area of building credible performance has to be communicating intent and expectations. It's so important to be really clear what and why you're doing something. I can share with my old team that I had worked with, they knew me inside and out. We have done things over and over. So people had a clear understanding of intent and expectations. As I jump into this new team, it's really important that we really be explicit in understanding why and how we do certain things. Just to assume that people understand, what you mean you should never assume. A great example, think about the quarterback. So Tom Brady, when he goes into that huddle, he gives clear directions and understanding to the team. So when they come out of that huddle, everyone knows exactly where they're running, exactly what the play is. And that's how you are successful. So it's so important to make sure people understand that what and why, because in doing so, they're going to be motivated and they're going to take the initiative to really think about how they can add value to it without even the direction you might have given them. At least they basically know the direction they're going. And the last, and I think this is such an important one in building credible performance, is holding others accountable for their performance. The key here is when you don't hold others accountable for performance, it can really have a negative impact on your team. Think about if you have two performers on your team. So one's the high performer, Mary, and Joe's the low performer. And ultimately, if you don't do anything with Joe to say, hey, you should really need to improve, it really demotivates, the high performer. And that's such an important thing to happen, because while you say the fear of conflict, as we talked about, not wanting to give that feedback in that Johari window, if you don't approach the confrontation that you need to, you actually ruin your credibility as a leader and this impact you have on your team by not acknowledging, how that high performer, because it's ultimately going to demotivate them. So this is such an important area where just thinking about how your actions can have an impact on others. Essentially, do what you set out to do. Let people know the why and what you're intending, and ultimately, as you set up those goals, make sure you hold people accountable. Not only will it help the motivation, but it'll also help the performance of your team. So credibility is lost when there are big discrepancies between what leaders say and what they do. Increasing credibility requires openness. Hidden agendas will destroy trust. So I think that's a great summary that kind of pulls together that whole self-awareness of, you don't want people talking behind your back. You want to have everybody on the same page, clear understanding of expectations. And when people do fall short, look to tell them. I think people would appreciate actually getting that feedback. It will motivate them more to figure out that you really are interested in helping them be the best that they can be. The second area I want to talk about is accountability. And accountability is this idea, seek to take responsibility before you begin to place blame. And it's so important that instead of pointing the finger at what might have been wrong or who might have done it, point the thumb at yourself and really look and see, what actions did I do, or how did I contribute to the particular failure in this situation? There's this concept of a mirror and window, and ultimately, poor performer in terms of a leader, they might look through the window and just ignore the problem. They might wait, they might place blame, they might ignore the elephant in the room because of that fear of conflict. Where, the influential leader is one who's going to look in the mirror and say, what is the challenge here? How can I own it? Even if it wasn't my problem to begin with, and what actions can I take to really help the situation? And one thing, it's so easy to take accountability for success. The hard part is taking accountability for those failures, and how can you learn from them? And one thing, I can share from experience I had, while it might seem really difficult to accept those failures, actually accepting those failures and responsibility for issues can really help build your credibility with your client and your team. I had a situation where I used to do mediation work, and I was in a meeting with my client, and there was all the counsel from both sides, and I was putting together a presentation. It was a pretty big deal. And walking through the presentation, I realized that some of the numbers I was walking through were incorrect. And as I was walking through them, I saw that they were incorrect, and I basically paused for a moment, and you can imagine the discomfort I was experiencing at that point in time, but said, this number is actually incorrect. The correct number is this number, and I continued to walk through the performance. So when I got back to my team, I was really focused on, how did this mistake happen? What can we do to fix it? Making sure I created a culture that was not a fear of telling me that there were mistakes. The last thing you want to do is, have people be afraid to share when something goes wrong. You want to know when something goes wrong so you can figure out how to fix it. I'm never big to want to place blame, but more importantly, how to fix it. But what's really interesting about that experience, years later, I learned that my client loved to tell the story about how Andrea Tecce screwed up in this meeting, but mostly because it was a positive, that event and how I had owned the situation had really helped build his credibility in me. Because ultimately he knew that if I was going to make a mistake, I was going to own it. And he didn't have to worry about me kind of trying to shovel it under the rug. So I think it's important to understand how accountability actually can basically breed your credibility. So accountability breeds responsibility. So having that in mind, I think, can really help you. because it's so easy to place blame, but these are really opportunities for us to really build up our credibility. The next area I'd like to talk about is this idea of service-based leadership. It's important to value everyone and serve the people in ways that matter. And I'll throw a little psychology in here. You might be cringing remembering this from Psych 101 when you were at school. But Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the important part I want to explain about this is that we all have different needs. And in order for us to perform, to kind of reach that self-actualization, it's so important that our basic needs are met. So whether they be physiological, are your breathing, food, sleep, you have your basic needs met, whether your safety, you're feeling financial secure, you have what you need, or your connection with your team, or just your self-esteem and confidence, which we're going to talk about in a minute. It's important for you as a leader to kind of understand where your team might be, because ultimately if they're having challenges personally or on your team, in the belonging or safety or just where they stand in the pecking order, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for them to reach their full potential. So understanding where they are and how you might be able to meet them is a great opportunity for you to be of service to your team. So let's think about some service-based leadership acts. And the first has to do with true service is not coddling or enabling, it's empowering. A great example I like to think about here is the helicopter parent. I'm sure we've all heard about them, and ultimately, if you are hovering over your kids, you're not helping them. By the time they get to college, it's going to be really impossible for them to be on their own. You can't expect the parent to be calling their next employer. Believe me, I know some that have done that, being on the receiving end of that. But this is where, as you work with others, you want to be there for them. You want to be supportive. But it's important that you allow them to make their own mistakes and you empower them to feel that success and be there for them. The second area is this idea of small acts of service can have a profound impact. This is just recognition. I was doing some interviews recently with some new clients, and these were all field supervisors working for an energy company out in the field. So these are guys who work 15 hours a day, 15 days on, 6 days off. And one of the key themes that came out in my interviews with them was this idea of appreciation. If their manager would just know their name, acknowledge who they are, say thank you, their motivation would increase, their productivity would increase. So it doesn't have to be a big act, but just thinking how you could be there for your team, it'd be tremendous. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you guys to think about some ways you might have done some service act for your team. But the last one I want to mention here is this idea of being aware of others' needs and take action to meet them. And this is really relating back to the triangle of our needs-based, and understanding, what may be going on with others in your team and how can you be there for them. As I mentioned to you, my father passed away a few years ago, which, he led a full life, so it was great. But one of the things that the team I was working on, two of the individuals from my team basically flew down to Florida, and they met me in Miami. It's where my dad lived, and they were there for 2 hours. But having those familiar faces in the room when I was having to give that eulogy, and just to be that support system for me, bred amazing loyalty. You wonder why I was at a company for 25 years. It was because of the people and the support and compassion that they provided to me. So whether it be something in their personal life, whether it be supporting them and how they work, think about how you can be there for individuals on your team. So I'd like to engage you for a moment. What are some things that you have done for your team or family or others, or been on the receiving end of this service-based leadership? I'd love to share some best practices and some ideas together. I know people are typing, so I'm waiting to see. Buying coffee, good stuff. I mean, whether you have a team team happy hour, give them lunch. Showing up for important events, showing your support. Sending some gift cards, flowers. I love that. I've often shared food when people either had a baby or death in family. Everyone needs food to kind of help them through the day. Acknowledging other teams. Eliza, let me know if they're going fast. So if you see some good ones to share with the group, please share too. And the thank you note, I think, is really profound. So especially this day with technology, so often everybody always is getting texts and emails, but just really writing down something, a handwritten note is, I think, special, and people often keep those. I would used to keep on my bulletin board, special notes that I have. And one other thing that I want to share with you, because when I actually left Navigant, I didn't get a gold watch, but one of the things that the team did for me was a flatter box, and I realized that it's here on my team on my desk because I want to show you, because this is a cool idea. You think that I'm selling for flatter box, but it's just this idea that in this box you could write little notes and get everyone on your team. So it goes along with the thank you note idea. You can write little notes to someone, and then they can have this. It's very inexpensive. It's extremely thoughtful, and it's a way you can really show your appreciation for others. And I think it's fun. The one that I happen to have here says, thank you for being a colleague and friend. It says, most of all, thank you for teaching me that eating good chocolate does make everything better. And I love to share that because this is actually from another William & Mary alum who's with very cool.
Teams that, let go of things so somebody else can own it.
Absolutely. And if they make a mistake, that's the way, that's the way you learn.
They were going fast. There's so many that, Amy Davis, of course,
any other great ones that you saw?
That's something we hear all the time, but people don't. They don't pause to take that time and listen to what somebody else on your team. And I also find inviting the entire team into the decision-making process and be less hierarchical.
That's great. So let me make sure this is moving forward. So it was on the chat. Just to leave us with a nice quote on this is, trust is built on credibility, and credibility comes from acting in others' interests before your own. So you're seeing how, the credibility, the accountability, the service base, they all really go together. And again, these are all behaviors that we just kind of need to have as best practices. None of this, all the stuff that I'm talking about today, none of it is rocket science. None of this is difficult, but it's all about kind of getting in shape. We all know if you have your New Year's resolution and you want to lose weight or you want to get in shape, we know what we need to do, but the hard part is actually doing it and really making it a habit so that it's becoming part of our regular repertoire. So the last area that I want to talk about in terms of spark behaviors is this idea of leading with confidence. Now, the thing about confidence is it's an emotion, and because it's an emotion, it can sometimes be shaky. And our level of success is ultimately tied to our results, our level of confidence is ultimately tied to our level of success and results. So the more that you believe in yourself, the more opportunity you have to be successful. And ultimately, sparks don't leave it up to chance. So you can really work on this. So let's talk about ways that you can really build your confidence. And this first area is this idea of experiencing success. With kids growing up, we're celebrating, they're in the growth mindset, we're celebrating their successes all along the way, whether they get a trophy for, participation isn't very rewarding in building confidence, but the idea of they have different rewards, they have grades, there's milestones all along the way. As we enter adults and we're in the workplace, it's really important to celebrate those milestones along the way and celebrate success. We were talking about in the service base, individuals kind of celebrating some of that success of your teams in the service base. And these really relate together because you want to be building that foundation of confidence so that when you do have those setbacks, when you give them the power to move forward and they still fall back, they know what confidence and success feels like. So they can kind of fall back onto that. my old firm, we used to have a game ball, and one person would get the game ball each month, and they'd pass it around, and you're recognizing something great they did. I recently went into an organization that was very sales focused, and they had this heavyweight belt, the big heavyweight belts for wrestling, and whoever had the highest sales for the day, got to keep the belt on their desk for the day. And it's this idea of just appreciating and recognizing along the way. I have this quote that I love. My younger son has a t-shirt with this saying on it. It says, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, except for bears. Bears will kill you." And I like this quote because it's essentially, it's the idea that we really learn from our mistakes, and unless we are heart surgeons, ultimately what we do isn't going to kill us or someone else, but can help make us stronger. However, if we don't have that foundation of confidence, when we fall down, it could really hurt and it could really cause a setback. So that's why it's really important to celebrate these little successes and build that foundation of confidence, because without that, those setbacks could really be huge setbacks. So it's really important to understand that. The second area of confidence building has to be this idea of surrounding yourself with positive role models. You can choose who you let in to influence you, because everybody has an opinion, and you just consider the source and choose who you want to be part of that. And ultimately, I can share for myself, I actually have some peer mentoring groups. I know I have a couple of my William & Mary mentor group on the line today, but really surrounding yourself with people that are going to help be your truth brokers, be your allies, help tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. This is really how you're going to help boost yourself and help you kind of grow with that growth mindset and continue to push yourself. If you constantly surround yourself who are yes people or people who are negative, it's going to have a negative impact on you. And I can also share that, I've had people in my life who they seem to be kind of toxic or negative. While I think they're really successful and there's a lot to learn from them, I kind of choose to spend less time with them because I don't want that influence in my life. So really think about who you are surrounding yourself with, and the more positive people you can surround yourself with and learn from, the better opportunity to build that foundation of confidence for yourself. And this next idea is this creating a positive self-appraisal for yourself. And this is really about believing in yourself. So we all know the little book that we read, The Little Engine That Kid, The Little Engine That Could. I think I can, I think I can. It's so important that if you don't believe in yourself, it's really hard for other people to believe in you. So you really need to be your own cheerleader. And I think the best saying for this, if you're all familiar with the Saturday Night Live, Stuart Smalley, you have, "I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me." And I know it's corny, I know it's silly, but it's really true. If Henry Ford had another great quote: "If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right." So it really is important for you to believe in yourself and believe that you can do something. Otherwise, it's going to just knock yourself down. And that really leads to the last confidence builder of managing key confidence killer emotions: your fear, your worry, your insecurity. Especially as it relates to the insecurity, you need to look to that positive self-appraisal, because usually it's these inner voice, the stories in your head that are knocking you down. So as it relates to worry, for example, think about, is this something that I have control over? Is this something that matters? It might be just something you can be concerned about, but it isn't something you can control. A great example, my younger son is applying to colleges right now, and I could sit here and be worried, is he going to get into his first choice? But I don't have control over that. Up until this point, I've helped him, have all the support he can. But at this point, it's just a waiting. So you might have things that are going on about work. You're waiting for a promotion, or you're waiting for a client pitch to figure out whether you got the pitch done. Just think about what's in your control. And if you create your preparation and understanding you've done everything you can kind of then control that inner voice. And it's easier said than done. But, really the self-talk to think about, what really is going on, and is this real? Is this fear real, or is it not? And kind of ground yourself in that discussion. So I'll leave you with this quote on the confidence topic, which is, "Don't cry over something that won't cry over you." And it gets us back to focus on what's in your control. Really, build that foundation of success for yourself. Surround yourself with positive role models, and be your best cheerleader. Confidence is such a roller coaster for so many of us. It tends to be even harder for women than men, I think. And again, this is my experience doing what I have with the women's leadership. But there's opportunities to grow yourself. There's a great book out there, To the Extent That you are a woman, or you're mentoring women, by Sarah Lashover. It says Women Don't Ask, and it gives you some exercises so that you can really focus on feeling what it is to have rejection. A lot of times people, their confidence is down because they don't like hearing the word no. I mean, one of the benefits my father always taught me, you could always ask, all they can do is say no. But if you let that word no knock you down, it's going to knock your confidence. So however you can really focus on putting yourself in a situation, even if they're low stakes, so you can feel what that rejection feels like, you can basically build up that immunity so that when you are at higher stakes, it's okay. You can learn from the experience as opposed to let it knock you down. So I want to go next. I want to close this out for a moment, and also, I'm going to give you another test, and I'd love you to use the chat
please start
for a moment.
typing them in now,
and tell
so that
me
we will
what
have
you
time to
are
take your
seeing
questions.
in this picture. So back to the chat. Go ahead. Yes. But real quick, I would like to know, tell me just, what do you guys see in the picture right now? Should be pretty obvious, but I would love some comments and thoughts.
Yeah, I find it interesting how people see different things. A lot of people are seeing
they're
freedom.
all loading, Liza. Oh, okay. I needed to scroll down. I was missing what you guys were saying. I apologize. So, not a team, soar, freedom, blue sky, soaring bird.
Pray fearing from below.
I love the comments that you guys are all sharing.
George Cruiser, pray fearing from below.
So, we look at this picture. What do you guys see now? Pray fearing from below. I love it. I love the sense of humor on this call. Thank you. So now looking at this one, what are you guys seeing? Something must be dead. Thank you, Thomas. It's awesome. Same thing, not as pretty. Flying into the future. I love the perspectives of this group. Flying into a storm. Bird flying alone with obstacles this time. Not a clear path ahead. Not every day, sunny. Solitude. Thanks, Jill. So it's interesting. A lot of times when people look at the first picture, they'll see a bird or an eagle. And I love the fact that this group is so insightful and kind of, looking beyond what's there. It's just a perfect example of that cognitive discipline of thinking, or cognitive flexibility, thinking beyond. I think that's the William Mary, like coming out in spades, where oftentimes when people look at this picture, it's, they see a bird flying or whatever. And, really the test that I was kind of looking to see from you, a lot of times people, miss completely that this is a picture of, sky. The bird is just a very small perspective of the picture. And what I love from this group is, you guys are really looking at this way beyond than just the narrow insight. And that really is the point of, this little exercise, is getting us to really focus on not being narrow-minded and really thinking about the big picture and how do we bring in other people's perspectives as we lead individuals. So I appreciate everyone's response, and I think it's amazing that, you know, I think from all the responses I'm seeing, they're certainly not limited by the parameters of what you saw, which is awesome. So just to kind of sum up real quick, and please, if you do have some questions, now is really the time. I want you to kind of put them in there so we can use any of the remaining time to talk about them. But ultimately, as we talked, you know, leaders aren't just born, they're made. And while, you know, we've probably, most of us on this phone have hit the genetics lottery in terms of intelligence, and, you know, thank our parents for that. Really, the positive thing to take away from this is the large part of what we can influence these spark behaviors has to do with our mindset. If we can really keep a growth mindset, be really open-minded, you know, the whole self-awareness, you know, welcome feedback from others, share with others so you can make sure people know exactly who you are so you can operate as freely as possible. Have that cognitive discipline to really inhibit those instincts to overreact and substitute it with a more credible response so that you can build that credibility with your team. You know, say what you're going to do and do it. Show up on time. The whole team I'm working right now are primarily military background. So when we say we're going to start at 8:01, we are starting pretty much at 7:59. There is nobody is late ever. And it really goes to the credibility of the team. You know, the idea of accountability, you know, figure out how you contribute to the situation, both positively and negatively, and welcome people to be sharing with you so that when something does go wrong, you're not creating a culture of fear of failure or fear of conflict, and really more problem solving with those challenges. As we talked about in the service area, you know, what can you be doing for others? Put their needs before yours, and that will certainly breed loyalty. And, you know, just it gives you your ability to really inspire others and influence those outcomes we talked about. And lastly, you know, just the confidence. I know I struggle with confidence. We all do. And one of the things I didn't mention, I'll share with you because it's a great little trick. You know, what we talked about here today is really working on the behaviors that are going to build that foundation of confidence. But if you want to fake it until you make it, until you are there, another opportunity, if you haven't seen the TED Talk by Amy Cuddy, she talks about the idea how your body behavior can have a positive impact. So she talks about doing this power pose. And if you do a power pose for 2 minutes before a big meeting or interview or something like that, there's actually research that shows that it can, you know, affect the chemicals in your body, and your behavior ultimately affects your attitude. And your body behavior then reflects, you know, confidence. So as we grew up, parents already told you, stand tall. There was a reason they told us to do that, because you want to exude confidence. So that's just a trick you can use to kind of fake it until you make it. So ultimately, I encourage you to work on the behaviors that will build that foundation. So with that, I just want to say that, you know, better leaders ultimately
we have two
world,
people who've Terry and Amy have both asked about recommended
so let's see, what are some, Eliza, you want to
which obviously there is one now, which is the one you've been talking about. But if you have some other suggestions, we could send them out in the follow-up email. And Terry and Amy, I could also ask some of our faculty if they have books to recommend, and just sort of put together a list for all of you.
Sure. Yeah, I have a litany of books. If you look at the side of my bedstand, there's probably 10 there. What I do want to share on the screen right now, a lot of what I talked about today is coming out from a recent book that came out in January from my colleagues called Spark. So if you want to text LeadStar at 66866, you will actually get a Spark book kit. Or if you want to go on our website, there's actually a ton of great free information on there. And we actually have a book club. So if you want to take I went to a honor credit union on last Friday, and the entire organization on their first day, they get this book Spark. And they actually had a book club, and you could organize a book club, and there's, for each chapter, there's activities and worksheets that you can do together. So I encourage you in your workplace to do this. And as you sign up, you can either do through this text, or you can go through our website. There's a leadership moment, and every Monday morning, it's about 400 to 600 words, so it's not long, but it's just a great reminder of leadership. As I said, none of this is rocket science, but it's reminders of the behaviors we need to do. And I've been on that leadership moment email for 10 years, and every week, every Monday, you know, they're 52 weeks a year, they're always different, and I always find them inspiring. And it's a great way that to kind of share them with your team when something is really relevant. But other books, as I mentioned, in terms of it relates to confidence, and especially for women, Sarah Lashiver has, you know, Women Don't Ask, and there's a couple books by her that on the confidence piece. There's another book by my colleagues called Leading from the Front. And if you want to work on relationship building, my colleagues have written a book on Cultivate, which I think is really great. But it's one of the, I knew exactly what you guys are looking for. There are so many amazing books out there, and I think as you read one, it's kind of a thread. You know, they might reference other ones that are going to help inspire you.
Roles where executives are often appointed to a line of business that they have never led before. At that level, are job-specific skills no longer relevant?
So, I mean, that is a really interesting question. So, to me, I think that as you move up the ladder, this is where the people skills really come into play. So, you know, you could be in charge of something, in charge of people who you know nothing about, but that's where it's important to be surrounding yourself, having that cognitive flexibility of surrounding yourself with the right team who can then help inform you on those technical issues that you need to know. But ultimately, you know, leadership is about the behaviors and surrounding yourself with people that are going to help you make, you know, the right decisions. I mean, depending on the industry, it might be more technical that it really is important. I mean, I think if you're a CFO, I mean, you have to have that accounting background, for example. But there, you know, a lot of times, as we talked in the very beginning, managing things versus leading people, you can have managers up and down the ranks. But the leadership really is about how you are inspiring others to do their job and how you might influence the outcome. So as long as you are surrounding yourself,
Samantha,
that you can have
by now you've
that right
seen
decision,
the website is on this page.
That's really
leadstar.us. And Lu Chang is typing in. Thank you. All right. Well, it is 12:57. And Andrea, I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time, and I know all the thought that went into it before the actual webinar. It's much appreciated because these do take a lot of work. And also, as always, I want to thank Karen Connor, who is behind us here, making sure that the technology is working as she always does. So thank you all, and Andrea, I hope to see you on campus when you come visit your son. My pleasure. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for joining.